All right. As we talk about the schedule, Kyle mentioned a couple of them already. Season opener, was it Shams reported it? That I think it was Shams reported it. That
opener against Milwaukee, October 23rd.
So home against Giannis to start off the season, and with head coach Doc Rivers. Maybe we'll talk about him a little bit later on. But
we will talk about him later on.
Milwaukee opened up the season at home.
Yeah, it feels like I don't want to say what I'm going to say because that would give away the next two games. There are some pretty clear teams that the NBA is interested in.
The Knicks, the Sixers, the Lakers, the Warriors, the Celtics.
Yeah, but that they're interested in matching the Sixers up against. They tend to put them in the high-profile games. Milwaukee has always been one since Embiid and Giannis burst onto the scene as MVP candidates. I know they played on Christmas Day a couple of years back. So this being the opener isn't necessarily all that surprising, but it is a great matchup, and it's a great stylistic matchup. It's a great matchup because of Embiid and Giannis, and it's just a great matchup because both teams do go about their business in very different ways. It'll be an interesting opening test, and that is in Philadelphia, so it'll be great too.
It's an interesting matchup too because the Bucks just started flailing and going in a different direction last season. Doc Rivers comes in the middle of the year. All right, he gets his full training camp. You get Giannis back healthy. Chris Middleton was injured. All kinds of things swirling around Damian Lillard and how that thing started to go in another direction. So not just the Sixers and their new lineup and their new team, but also with the Bucks and what they might look like. Because when we start talking about Boston and New York and Philadelphia, Milwaukee's kind of like in that next tier of talking about them and leaving them out when we've always talked about Milwaukee in the top three with Boston and Philadelphia. So they kind of have something to prove to that people are leaving them out of the discussion and putting them there with Cleveland and Orlando instead of with Boston and Philadelphia. So Milwaukee has a lot to prove.
Kyle, where do you think they should be ranked? I feel like you have strong opinions on the Milwaukee Bucks. Yep.
Well, here's the thing with them. Their future hinges on whether Dame Lillard's previous season was an anomaly and a result of some physical issues that he can bounce back from, or this is just the new normal, right? Like, it was a bad down season for Dame. He shot 42% from the field, 35% from three, and all the stuff about him being like, well, he's the perfect fit for Giannis. You're going to run everything through Dame in crunch time. They're going to just pick and roll teams to death. I don't think that really came to fruition. And I think more importantly, in assembling the Dame Giannis duo as the core of your team, they broke up what was previously the identity of the team, which was, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't that it was just a defensive identity. It's that they had an elite two-way reputation and stats and production for 4 or 5 years in a row, probably. Like, they were a regular season juggernaut. Now, a lot of that didn't translate to the playoffs, sometimes due to injuries. Sometimes there were coaching issues, what have you. I just think that I don't have a lot of trust in Dame aging gracefully here over the next few years. There was another year, a few years back, where I felt kind of the same way, and then he bounced back in 22, 23, had a very good season.
Like a hip, not a hip, it was an ab thing, right?
Yes, some kind of abdominal issue. And so really what you feel about the Bucks is a litmus test, or what you feel about Dame Lillard is a litmus test for what you feel about the Bucks. Because if you think he's going to be back to, I'd say, like the standard Dame Lillard season, they will be in the inner circle of NBA contenders, because I think the offense can be so good that you can get by some of the defensive stuff. But one of the big consequences of trading for Dame beyond just the defensive stuff is that your depth now is not very good. It's gotten older. Chris Middleton had some moments at the end of last season, so he looks like he's. I thought he was cooked, and he had some great moments in the playoffs and late in the regular season. So that's if you're a Bucks fan or a Bucks believer in the media, wherever, those are great signs for them. I'm just very skeptical of that trio, and so I would put them outside of that top group that I do think the Sixers are in. I think the Sixers are probably on the lower end of it, but I do think the Sixers are above the Bucks if we're trying to assign tiers to where teams are.
Boston has their own tier because they won the championship, but next up it's been New York and Philadelphia, back and forth of how people feel of where they are. I personally had New York first, and then they lost Hartenstein. And once they did that, Paul George, Caleb Martin, all the stuff that then followed for the Sixers, I put them right in front of New York now as far as the second best team in the Eastern Conference on paper for right now, with New York right there behind it, because the Hartenstein piece was real. We saw it. We saw it ourselves of how important he was for them. And now they have Mitchell Robinson, Precious Achiuwa, Jericho Sims as their front court, as their bigs. And now look, Julius Randle is also coming back. And if he can stay healthy, that's a difference maker. But right now, I think I would just put the Sixers right there. So Milwaukee is in that Cleveland, Orlando tier right there in that conversation because of the question marks that come with it. But the point of it, of us even starting this whole thing, was because opening night, nationally televised game, they're going to try to prove something against the Sixers in that opening matchup here in Philadelphia. Then you mentioned the other game, which was November 6th against the Los Angeles Clippers. Paul George returns to Los Angeles, and Chris Haynes is reporting that one from Turner, and that's an early West Coast trip than we are normally accustomed to seeing.
So I feel like they normally have some sort of early West Coast trip, but it's almost never in LA. Yeah. I think if they do an early one, it tends to be Phoenix. They do maybe not Phoenix, maybe Phoenix is in there, but I think it's like they'll do Minnesota, Denver, Utah, Portland. It's some mix of those four teams, and maybe you sprinkle Phoenix in there.
Furkan Korkmaz's incredible shot from a couple years ago.
So that's the one that sticks out in my mind. LA is normally later in the season, in part because you can put that around Christmas, and that's a game that has a decent amount of interest.
And that was always the Disney trip.
The Disney
on Ice thing that would send them out west.
In some recent years, we've seen them go in like late February, early March, a post-deadline trip. They'll hit the Clippers, the Lakers, the Warriors, the Kings, and Phoenix. Right. And that's part of that big. And then there's the separate, you hit all the Texas teams at one point too. So yeah, it's interesting that they got it in so early. I had a couple people, when I tweeted out some thoughts about it earlier, I had a few people that replied to me. It was interesting. They said, I wonder if that means that the Denver game is going to be early. And it would make some sense if the NBA has looked at how many times Joel has missed it in recent years and said, you know what? We're putting Jokic and Embiid on the schedule as early as possible. You will be healthy more than likely. Let's get down to business. And maybe that's the mentality. But we don't know the rest of that trip yet. I'm just trying to piece together, based on what we know so far, there could be some repercussions that changes what the rest of the season looks like.
We all silly like the mayor.